Welcome to the first video tutorial for the first section of content and creating a small little app. We're going to go back to the example that we used in the introduction on creating a application that asks the user for their starting balance, the deposits they made, the withdrawals they made, and then calculates the ending balance for the bank account at the end of the month. So to get started, let's just open up Xcode. And we are going to create a new project. For this one, we just need single view application. Click next. I'm just going to call this bank balance. Leave the rest the same. Click next. And I've created a folder on my desktop called applications. And I'm just going to save my application in that folder. So to get started, let's take a look, a quick review of the four main areas that we have in our Xcode interface window. So over here on the left-hand side, we see the file pane. Here on the upper right-hand side, we have our utility area. Down here in the bottom is our libraries pane, where we can drag and drop elements into our UI design that we'll see in just a little bit. And here in the middle is our editor window, which for now, since we haven't started, is just giving us basic version about our app that we're creating. So to get started, let's jump into the main storyboard and start doing some designing. I always like to start by changing the size of my window, just to give myself more space, to a 5.5 inch. So for our application, let's put in a label. I need to click here. Let's put in a label in the middle of the screen and call it bank account balance. So we can play around with this font a little here in our utility pane. We can change the font, and you can change these to anything that you'd like. I'm going to go with Arial, make it a little larger, and we can even change the color here. So let's go for bluish color. Expand this a little bit so you can see it all. Recenter it with that blue guideline that you see. Also, we're going to need 3 more labels and 3 text box. So let's just drag in a label here and change it to enter starting balance. Let's get another label, enter deposits, and our final label for our final input is enter withdrawals. So let's get those set up with our guidelines and just kind of evenly spaced out. There we go. And just one extra step, I'm going to scoot them all down a little bit, and I'm going to pop in an image view here, right up at the top. So before I started the video, I just went online and found a picture on Google that I liked to represent a bank account. And to access images in our UI image view, we need to take the image and drag it into our file pane right underneath the images folder here. Make sure copy items if needed is checked and click finish. And then we can click on our image view and then come here to our utility area and select the image that we just drug in. And then you have all these different options: aspect fit, aspect fill, scale to fill. So I'm going to go with aspect fill, shrink it down a little bit, that recenter. Alright, so let's move all these up again just a little more. And enter in our 3 text box. Our text field, I'm sorry. So we want one here. Just kind of spreading it out a little to give it some space. Again, 2 more. Actually, let's look at another way. If you just click on the text box that you just drug in and go up here to edit, you can just say copy and paste it. It's already the same size. And then we can say paste, drag it down to here. Alright, so we're going to need also a button down here for when we're ready to run the calculation. So let's drag in a button. And I'm going to call this calculate. And you can get creative with the button as well in your utility area. I'm just going to leave it here for now. And then we need one final label down here for our output. So we have our 3 inputs, which are coming from the user, and then our 1 output. So I'm going to make this a little larger. Do some formatting here, changing the font. Center it. And I will leave the label in there for now. We'll come back in a little while and delete that out so that we just have a plain label down there for taking text whenever we run our application. So let's click up here, the 2 circles, our assistant editor, so that it will show us our view controller file as well as our main storyboard. And we need to get started by creating a couple of outlets. So we are going to need an outlet for this first text box. So if we just highlight the text box, hit Control, click on it, and drag right up to here. We want it to be an outlet, and I'm going to call this starting text box and connect. We'll do the same thing for our deposits. Control, click, and drag it up. And I'm going to call this deposits text box. And the same thing with our withdrawals. Withdrawals text box and connect. And then we also need to create an outlet for this label down here. So I am going to Control and click, and I'm going to call this output label and connect it. Just clean that up a little bit. So now we also want to go ahead and create an action for our button down here so that when the user presses calculate, the calculate button, the app knows what we're expecting it to do. So instead of an outlet, we're going to create this as an action. So the same way, Control, click, and drag it up, and here we'll change to action. I'm going to call it calculate button. So all of our coding for this simple application is going to happen right inside of here. So we're going to create our variables for storing the starting balance, deposit, and withdrawal inputs while telling it where they come from all at the same time. So we want to create a variable and call it our starting balance. And we're going to set that equal to what we called our text box, our first text box for the starting balance text box. Starting, and you can see here it automatically fills it in for you. Starting text box dot text, and since this is a string that's coming in here, we want to change it to an int since we'll be working with numbers. So we do that simply by typing to int open parentheses, close parentheses. Then we also want to make a variable the same way for our deposits. Make sure I spell it right. We're going to set that equal to deposits text box dot text, because we're taking the text from that text box and changing it to an int and storing it in our variable. One more, a variable for withdrawals. We're going to set that equal to our withdrawals text box dot text to int. And finally, we need to work on the calculation that happens in order for us to have the output at that bottom label down there. So I always like to just put in a check. We want to make sure that the starting balance isn't empty, just to be safe, to make sure that the users put something in there. To be ultra safe, you would do this for all three, but just for the purposes of this app, I'm just going to put it in for one to show you how it's done. So we're going to say if starting balance does not equal nil for empty, then we want to run some kind of code. So we're going to do an open curly bracket, hit enter, and it automatically puts in the closing curly bracket for us. So the way that we're going to calculate the total, if you haven't figured it out by now, is creating another variable that we're going to call ending balance, and we're going to set that equal to the starting balance plus the deposits and minus the withdrawals, obviously, is how we're going to get what the ending balance for the account is. So we have a variable end balance equals our starting balance plus our deposits minus our withdrawals. And then right inside here, we want to tell the program where that's going to go. Oh, and you'll see we're getting a little error here. So because these don't have any values saved to them yet, we've just told it up here. It's a variable. It's going to be coming from this. It wants us to unwrap them. So if we just put an exclamation point behind each one of these, then that should solve our problem. So we want to work with our label down at the bottom for our output the same way that we worked with these up here. So we are going to say output label dot text equals the ending balance in your account is, and we want to refer to the variable end balance as part of our output. So to do that, we just do a $sign and our backslash, and then we put the name of the variable right inside those parentheses. And so that's all for inside of our if. And to close off the if, we want to have an else. So we're going to open curly bracket, hit enter, and we'll get our close. We want to put the output label dot text equals error missing information above. So that's going to just kind of be our catch. So it's going to get here if one of the if starting balance, which is our first one, is not nil, just in this example, then it's going to run this line of code and then this line of code. But if it gets here and starting balance is nil, then it's going to jump down to the else because the if statement is false. And so it's going to output this to the bottom to tell the user there was an error and they need to go back and look and see what's wrong. So let's come over here to our label really fast, and if we highlight it, you'll see in our utility pane we have the second one here that says label. We just delete that out. It will empty out our label field, so it's just empty and ready for us to run. Then we can go back to our single view and use our iOS simulator. I have iPhone 6 selected. We can change it to the 6 Plus because it did 5.5 screen, so let's just hit play. And we should see after a few moments, it's kind of slow sometimes. Change the size of this, that we get our application. So we have an error here. This is kind of cutting it off. We'll go back and bring that down. So let's put in our ending balance, our starting balance. So let's say I had 100, and for my deposits I made 100. And see, we have another error here. We need to have it getting rid of that. Get larger. We need to have it getting rid of that keyboard, or moving our spacing closer together so that the keyboard's not blocking it. So just for the sake of time, and because that's something that hasn't been covered yet, I'm going to take all of these and just move them up. So that we can see the correct way that it should look. Our calculate here. Move that later. That a little smaller. There we go. So let's try to run this one more time. So we want our starting balance to be 100, and our deposits to be 100, and then our withdrawals will be 100. And then when we click our calculate button, we would normally see behind there the calculation of the output. So let's do one more time. Here, let's try this. Let's go to our utility pane and check out the keyboard type. So let's change it to the number pad for all of these. Just so we can see that output for now without getting too involved in what we can do to fix that ahead of where you would be in the modules. So let's just run it. And we're going to enter our starting balance, and see we have a different keyboard now, so we'll do 100. And then we will enter our deposits, 100, and our withdrawals of 100, and when we push calculate, it should say correctly your ending balance in your account is $100. So later on in this tutorial, our tutorials will see how to have the keyboard respond to the user. So when they hit enter or tab outside of the area, the keyboard will disappear. But for now, we just wanted to look at a basic application, reviewing the labels and our text fields for input and output, interfacing with the Xcode interface, and just some basic ideas to get you started with programming. So good luck with the rest of the modules, and I will see you again soon for the next video.